Hi everyone, welcome back. So we've done a little bit of Vellum now, and we've got a little pose creature, and I'm just going to now revisit back to a previous video. I think we did a video, a bit of comp in Nuke, maybe version 4, and I'm going to try and do a bit of comp in Copernicus in this video. So it's going to be all dedicated to Copernicus. So what I'm going to do is try and explain and recreate what we did in the Nuke setup we did here. So if you remember, we have this template, and you can look at this file yourselves, it'll be there. And we have the ability to go through and switch between a comp with the studio lighting and an occlusion version that all spins around. And then when it's rendered out, it switches automatically to, it'll render out all three. So it'll render out the HDRI background option and maybe a grey background, like a non-biased kind of non-distracting background. And then it'll also give you option to do a separate thing with an occlusion, just if you want it as well. So I figured this is like a template I've dropped down. It's just a starting point for presentation. It's not comp integration into live action plates or anything serious. It's just something to look at. So it may change, but I thought, well, this is kind of a good starting point. Every time I do an asset, I will throw it through this comp. But the only thing is I've got to keep updating these manually and know exactly what's on disk. And I'm sure with a bit of Python and a bit of time invested, I could work this out. But for now, I just created this controller, and I was using the manage the user knobs, and I was kind of editing and adding in what I had on disk and what I knew, what geometry variants I had. And I was doing the same for the things like the material variants, just adding them in and things like that. So this very manual list that I'm predefining that I want to pull in and just manually change things. So I'd say, give me this version and hit render, and give me that version, hit render. Yeah, it's fine if you want to spend a bit of time on it. But I thought, let's go into Copernicus and recreate that whole thing. So down here, you may have noticed this thing lurking around. So I'm going to change desktops now to a image compositor desktop. So I'm going to go to image, and this is a desktop where we are presented with the Copernicus view. And then I've got a couple of things like a recipe, textbox, Python shell. And down here I've got a scene view, and they're all linked. So they're linked to this one-to-one. So whatever I see and interact with is going to be displayed in the viewer here. And I've got this stage monster bash comp. So we're inside of the comp. If I press 1, we're kind of looking from the stage level in, and Copernicus displays this as like a grid. And this is usually because you could actually have geometry here, and you could be compositing, authoring textures and doing some procedural kind of substance designer type stuff in here. But the actual viewer is here, and this is where the display flag is. So for example, if I put my blue flag here, you'll see I can display an output consistently in 3D space, the images. And then on the top here, I'm going to switch this up here to this. So the image and handles follow the selected nodes. So I can quickly select, and if you can see, as I'm selecting, I can see how the comp is kind of being put together as well, things like that. So you can kind of see how this is happening. But the export, the blue one, is basically here. So if I want, I could always just pick this particular one here and maybe go space 3, and now I've got like a flat front view of the comp that I can always just export. And then up here, it's basically whatever I select. So, oh, by the way, this is the comp. So we're going to go through it, and I'll try and explain what's happening. But essentially, this is going to recreate what we had here in Nuke, but in Copernicus. But we're going to be able to automate everything. So at render time, it will actually chuck out a grey version, an occlusion version, and it will also switch between the where is it? The option to have the grey background or the HDRI background. So that's going to be triggered at the back end of the top network here. So there's some new ones here, Gray, HDRI and OCC, and they're all going to run, and they are actually referencing, their ROP fetch nodes are referencing the end points here. So they're referencing these image ROP outputs as well. So we're going to go through all of this and just show you how that's working. So let's get started. So the first thing I did is I brought in my HDRI image, and I was trying to replicate the spherical transform setup that we had up here, spherical transform node, which if you remember, it just kind of reformats and distorts that into something that looks like a normal camera. And then this thing was like spinning around to kind of replicate the spinning light rig. And then we'd switch between the gray to have a non-distracting background, and then we'd just apply the shadows, the reflection occlusion and the reflections if needed, and just like bring them all together. So you'd have this background section here. So in Houdini, what I've done is I've brought in a file node, and I've just pointed to the HDRI on my job, and again it's right under here. And to select the name, I'm stealing the variable at HDRI map, which is created in the COP network in these guys. So I can choose to render and switch between these, and this will auto update. So when this renders, this HDRI map will be loaded in correctly, and that will be corresponding to the lighting environment that is kind of done here as well. So you'll see that this is the garden, and take note of the resolution shifting around for a minute. This is a low resolution render just to get things working. So the way I did this is I couldn't find a spherical transform, so I ended up doing just like a cheap transform. So I basically projected this onto a HD kind of layer, and then I just zoomed in a little bit. So I kind of got something similar. So the idea is that I could change and translate this to find some kind of nice position to just put the character on. So it's a bit of a manual thing until I can figure that out. And then we have a background switch here where we can switch between the gray or the actual HDRI. And then I've got like a vignette, which I didn't use. I actually was actually going to do a vignette here and just darken this down, but I ended up using OpenCL to do the vignette. So I just go to the scene view and I kind of display here, you'll see the end result, and as I select them you'll see the vignette is kind of kicking in. So this is just just me trying to get my head around a bit of OpenCL to do probably the most basic image thing ever, which you can do with a ramp and a brightness node and stuff, but I was just adding a vignette. Okay, and then the next thing is I wanted to bring in the renders, so I just bring in a file node. Now I know we can actually see these in the bash comp in Solaris. If you're not familiar with that, you can actually do things where you can actually load in a comp directly into Solaris's viewport and bake that kind of straight to disk. I'm aware of that and it's really cool, but I want to have the EXRs in a separate folder, and then I want the comp stuff to go in another folder. So I just thought I'd do it this way for now and see how it goes. So the renders would be done on disk, and they would be dynamically brought in using the job, which is the monsters project up here, and then they go to the usual Houdini structure, and then again they're named correctly, basically monsters, and then they're named off this variable, so it finds the renders that we need there. Look, so that's a file node. So when you bring a file node in from the very big, thank goodness I've just typed in there, when you bring in a file node and you bring in an image, you can bring in this, navigate to it and click accept, and it'll load this chap in, and then you can add the AOVs from file, which is a really cool feature actually. Just a word about this: when I set up my render back up, if I press U back up here and I set up my AOVs, and I've got my background plate AOVs coming in from here, and I've got crypto, utils, and AOVs. I actually had a few active that I'm not using, like direct volume and indirect volume. They're not actually being used, in emission and coat. They're not actually being used, so they won't actually contribute. So if I just go backwards into the comp, but they will be present in here. So what I do is I just either fix that in Houdini when I'm before I render, or if I've forgotten, I just fix it in here and I delete them in here. So I essentially just go in and I remove unwanted AOVs. Now it doesn't delete them from disk or from this file, it just deletes them from this node, so you can't like read them in. So I would like get rid of indirect volume and other things that I wouldn't want. Now sometimes I render a beauty and a crypto mat and a utils. By utils I mean like I have the position, the depth, the normals, all in separate files anyway. But as you can see, if I press U, I've actually just rendered it in one swift move here, which sometimes is okay. So if I just go back into the comp, so here is the EXR containing everything we need, and you will see I'm pulling out these into nulls. And what I like to do is, just because Karma's orange, I color it orange, and I basically say this is my CG source, and then I put the name of the AOV into a null here, so it's a buffer. So if this gets removed, then I always remember how my comp was, you know, if for some reason you didn't have any nulls here and this thing got a little bit corrupt because you were changing things and you brought a new one in, you'd have to kind of remember where to wire things up. And also you'll be wanting to rebuild this and take things from different AOVs, so you'll want to take maybe UVs to do extra things with texturing or depth or holdout. So when I originally did this, I'm just going to press O to remove that. When I originally did this, I had wires and lines going everywhere, and it was just chaotic. So I was kind of looking for an object merge type of thing, or like if you use Fusion, they have wireless nodes, or if you use Nuke, they have the postage stamp, which is, this is a postage stamp. And it basically, you plug in, well, I'll show you. If you didn't see this, you do a postage stamp like that, and it's empty. And when you connect it, it basically copies a reference in, and then you can hide the input. And if you click off, you've got a nice clean like connection to another part of your network. And I don't see that in Houdini at the moment. So that's a postage stamp doing exactly what we've just created. And it keeps the mind calm. It keeps things organized. These big green lines are actually something, they're expressions, aren't they? And you can actually turn those off in the settings, in the preferences. I think there's something somewhere, it's in here, expression arrows, and if you want you can turn them off. So yeah, anyway, I like them on because it shows me at first glance something's happening. I'm sure there's a shortcut for that. But my point being is there is very little kind of chaos in the lines apart from these big ones. So in Houdini I was looking for that and I couldn't find it, and it's a bit like Fusion with the wireless nodes. I really enjoyed those and I couldn't find that. So, and I needed information from this to composite the shadows in. So just to show you, I'll switch this back to the grey one because it's going to be easier to see, like multiplying and adding the reflections in here. And how I've done that is I've just brought another file node in and I've just linked the EXR from here into there. So I would literally go right click, copy the parameter, select this guy, then I would go paste relative references, and now this is the master CG source, I guess, and this is the one that's always referencing. So to see those green lines that we have like in Nuke, these things, Houdini has the brown ones. So if you go view, show for selected nodes, then you'll see that the CGI holdouts is actually referencing something from in here. Now, don't follow this directly, like it's not going into the holdout diffuse, it's just saying this node has some kind of information referenced. So a lot of people have asked me about that. Is it taking holdout diffuse because I'm using holdout diffuse? It's not, it's just referencing something from the node. So they're both file nodes, but this is just referencing middle click. You can see it's referencing that. So then I would just pull out the AOVs here and then do that null thing again here and then start to comp. So like we did in Nuke, I would bring in the, if we've got it, the holdout reflection and the holdout shadows, I'd add them, invert, and then multiply that in. So you'll notice my renders are at a very low res. And then when we've comped them, they go to HD, and that's because I've set the comp to be at the HD, and the background layer is, the coming in background layer is HD. So it's always going to kind of upscale the actual kind of proxy renders. So because I rendered this with some settings up low while I was just playing around, so I had this low resolution kind of in here while I just worked all this out. Back in the comp, you can basically start adding in the holdout diffuse. So if you had emission, I think that would come in, like anything glowing would bounce into the diffuse and that would be there. And then you've got reflections. I'm not sure if I've covered them all, but you can look at this in the sidefx docs. It's well explained. So you add those in and then you essentially get this grey background with a bit of vignette and something nice. Very similar to what we had over in Nuke, if you remember. We've got this, so there's not too much in it visually, is there really? So so that's kind of like me bringing in the background and doing that. I then I'll switch now back over to the HDRI because it'll be a bit easier to visualize. But if I switch back over, I then added in just a fake depth of field. Again, it's not a very precise thing, but essentially I'm just creating a ramp and then a bokeh node to say blend off from this distance. So this was just eyeballing this when I put the monster on top. And then I'm just kind of creating a size ref and a shape, STF shape, to create this kind of thing to put in the aperture to kind of give a bit of bokeh shape, but I don't know if you can see it. I'm probably using this wrong. So that was kind of like me prepping up the background. In fact, I don't think I blurred the background in Nuke. So, you know, it's just a little thing I was messing around with. But there we go. So that's kind of like all the background stuff. So for the CG, we will bring in the CG and then we will again pull out into nulls, and I'll get all the AOVs that I need to rebuild. So I just add them together like so, and you'll see along the way there is a HSV correct, which is well, self-explanatory. You can hue shift and you can deal with different values of saturation. They're always at the defaults and they're just there for like a quick look dev tweak. So for example, if I decide to change the subsurface, if you look at the main guy down here and you look at my subsurface, and if I decided to do a hue shift and just discolor him, and then maybe the maybe just turn down the actual scale of the subsurface and things, you can see how much it's contributing to this creature's design or whatever. So we kind of, you can do quick look devy stuff post render as well, but and then go back and fix it in 3D. So you can do that. So if you hold Control middle click, you can reset these as well, so you get the same thing. So these are just optional, they're not really doing anything. And if you go back to Nuke, it was a bit like what I did when I brought in the original, this different creature, obviously. We've got the other guy. When we did the unpremult and we rebuild the beauty, and then we apply the alpha, and then we premult again, we get a direct copy of what comes in, goes out. But we have the luxury of tweaking stuff. This is more like a shot-based integration workflow. When it's look dev, I try not to tweak it too much, but sometimes it's great for just quickly eyeballing and debugging how an image is assembled and what might be too much. Like I think this is all too very subsurfacey, but it's not a look dev course. I'm just a workflow course. So the rebuilding the beauty happened in Houdini at this point here, like so. So I've just opted here. Now you may notice some have thumbnails and some don't. I found having thumbnails gave me a bit of a performance issue, so I came up here to preferences, network views. I turned this off, show previews on new cop nodes, So essentially, if I do a HSV, it shouldn't have a preview, but I'm not entirely sure why that is. It should have just come in without a preview. So I'm not entirely sure why that has got a preview, but maybe I'm doing it wrong. But if you right click and go actions, thumbnail, you can turn it off. So you can turn thumbnails on and off. If you really want to see a thumbnail at a critical moment in your comp, you can go to flags and then turn on the thumbnail and go and bring the thumbnail back as well. So when you'll find your comp will be a little bit quicker to process. I tend to leave them on in certain stages. So that's the rebuilding the beauty. And then I decided to do a little bit of a relighting setup where you could just add in a light. Now I don't normally do this for look dev scenes, and it's not in the Nuke scene because it's a look dev scene, but the way I did this is I brought in again the file node referenced, and I brought in the normals, the ones with displacement and the one with the geometry normals. So there's two, so I can have a look, and I've plugged in the one with I've plugged in this one. As you can see, if I zoom in and I switch between them, don't look any different, which is kind of bizarre. Oh yeah, I need to view the display flag here like that, and then if I do that, you can see there's N and then there's NG. So N is like the normals with the I think it's with the displacement and the normal map, and then I think NG is just like the geometric normals, I think. So you can choose one of these to plug into your light, and you can relight this. So if I quickly view the end of my comp again, maybe we'll view this one. And then you can see I've added light, like a fake light to it, which I can dial in after the render time. So it's not critical for this tutorial, but I just thought I'd throw that in there, and just so I could remind myself at a later date if I need to just try some things out. There's tons of stuff you can do with position paths, facing ratios, and all sorts. If you're doing stylized renders, it's quite fantastic for that, a bit like Nuke. So the next thing is we've rebuilt the beauty minus the additional lighting I just tried to do, and then we're going to do like we're going to get an alpha now. So I'm going to get the color, which does contain the alpha pass, and then I'm going to channel split just the alpha and pop it in to I have to channel split the original. This looks a bit weird, but it's giving me the RGB, and then I'm going to channel join again, so we get RGB and then alpha, so I can kind of get that returned back. So we've now got a rebuilt image. So if you're not needing any of that, you can just plug in your render, but it's just nice to have a little thing to intercept and do a bit of look dev work there. So there we go. So we've got the creature's beauty. I then chose to do a little sharpen. So there's the convolve node, and you don't need a lot, but sometimes on certain renders you can just ping your render out with a bit of sharpen. And then I tend to glow any highlights a little bit. Again, it's all tongue-in-cheek, this bit. And then the next thing is I took the depth pass. So again, it's a file node, and I've done a depth pass, and I've got a custom depth path with no AA. So that came from, I think it came from the utils, sorry. You can put AOVs in certain areas. It can be a bit confusing sometimes. So I created the standard depth pass, and then I created a custom depth pass as well. It might have been actually on the render node under extra render vars. So this is one with the AA anti-aliasing. They can be quite useful for comp sometimes, but I'll not go into that too much. So that's why there's two depth passes. So I pulled in the depth pass here like so. I don't think I need the source. I believe I can just plug that straight in and it'll work. So I think that should be okay. So that might be overkill. So then I've remapped it. So these values came from me just pressing I and coming up here and analyzing the closest pixel, which is 8.5, and then the furthest one, which looks like it's kind of hitting 23. So I kind of put that in a remap and just tried to get some, just press I again, some black and white gradient in there on this creature. And I put that into a bokeh node to kind of throw out just some of the background tentacles a little bit and just to sit it in the background. So I've actually got like a background blurred separately, and then I've got this blurred here, and then I'll just blend them together and you get this fakeness. Now I'm probably using the bokehs wrong, and I found this compared to Nuke's new bokeh node, which is fantastic. You know, that's Houdini's falling short, I think, there, but it's only a matter of time, I think, before we get new tools for like major compositing. But so far we've managed to get something that looks okay for a presentation. Then I added a bit of the old chromatic aberration. It kind of, that can distort the backplate a little bit sometimes and just give a little bit more nice qualities to things. It's totally optional. There isn't a film grain yet in Copernicus, so you could load in an image of film grain or some film. So I just created a fractal noise and just gave it a lot of really high frequency, and then just multiplied 0.1 into that, so you can see there's a bit of aberration and a bit of grain. And normally I wouldn't add grain because I always take EXRs out of Comp and put them into DaVinci and do it that way. But maybe it'll help when we have the alternative grey background, which can often create a lot of banding. So if I come back up and display this, there's a bit of grain, and it's going to stop hopefully banding on that grey when it goes on the internet or whatever. So yeah, there's the grain, and then I've added a font, and the font's dynamically read from all of the tops attributes. So op name is grabbing monster, and then it's going to grab our tops variables, geo, don't mess it up like that, geovar, atmat, var, sorry, and then hdr var. And if you remember in the tops graph, this is what's kind of driving everything so far. So we've got this HDRI map, and we can use the same variable and blend in different maps. And then we've got the material variant that we can choose from or add in, geometry variants. And when this is all processed, these resolve correctly to match the renders, and it kind of just works. So that was quite interesting. It's not reading metadata out of the EXR files, it's just live in the Houdini scene because this comp exists with the look dev scene. So I just did it that way. There's tons of ways you can do things. So then I blurred it and I did a HSV to darken, and then I just added that on. So basically just tried to ping it out a little bit with a drop shadow. Again, probably not essential. So there's the out comp. So that was pretty much it. So now we can have the choice between rendering the out comp or having the, let me just go back to the viewer, having the HDRI thing going off. So you can have a grey one and a HDRI map. So this render was a test render. This was from the Vellum one where we just, if you remember, we dropped this, well, we just hung this guy's tentacles onto the floor and we very silly just chopped him up, and we carried the fascia along for the ride. It's not actually this, the fascia is actually just point deformed based on the external position, just for some fun, but we'd probably just fix this up at the end of the tutorial. So we've now got a sequence that will run automatically. So what you can do is then, furthermore, if you want, you can create a contact sheet and have them side by side, or it's up to you. So we then create an occlusion one, very much like we did in Nuke, where we kind of did the same thing, and then I did a postage stamp and brought in the beauty, and then when I finished comping, I got like a just an ambient occlusion pass. So I essentially just grabbed the ambient occlusion that we rendered, and when you render the ambient occlusion, press A, it just renders this. There's no background, and that might be something I've done wrong, but it also might be because the background plate is on the ground, and it might just set its primary visibility, it might just set it to phantom, so there's no actual geometry visible in the alpha. I might be able to fix that in Karma, but I didn't really see that coming. So I ended up taking the crypto mats here, and if I just show you, and just making a crypto mat alpha, for the floor, and then I took the existing alpha and I just did a channel merge, and then I just multiplied that in, so you kind of get something like that. And then I did a white constant, a little bit of grain, a bit of a vignette, and then I merged it in, and I chose to remove the background bowls here as well, and then just did another vignette and some text. So yeah, so from one render I kind of got another freebie, so I thought that was quite interesting. It's a no frills render, I guess, and I thought, well, I want that in Houdini, so I did something similar, but I just realized I'd forgotten to take out the reference balls using the cryptomat technique. So the way we did this is we have the AOV ambient occlusion, so again it's the file node referenced in with the AOV pass, and then with the cryptomats, I'll quickly just say all I needed was just an alpha of everything. So I got away with just selecting all and taking the alpha, and then adding the alpha back in to the AOV, like so. So I got this alpha. Try not to do Nuke shortcuts. There we go. And then I could just blend that over the background, which is HD, constant HD background. And that constant is HD because my main comp is set to HD. So even though the render is coming in at this, it comps it over and it'll be a little blurry, the main render, but when this renders at HD, it'll look much nicer. And then I've just added in the shadows, so you can kind of multiply in the shadows as well. So you'll see that this is kind of now pulling in from up here. Again, I'm just taking in the stuff we did for the pulled out reflections and shadows, and I'm just stealing that. So there's no wireless, there is actually a line going across. I can handle that. Not too, but that would have been a wireless link if I could have done that, but that's fine. So there's the shadows, and then I do a sharpen and then a vignette, and I just kind of add the text, and that's the I've not bothered with the lighting balls, I've just left them in. I couldn't find a roto node in Copernicus, so I could just mask it out or something, or try and use cryptomats. Cryptomats in Houdini, there is a very good explanation on that Copernicus, the Ultimate Copernicus guide, where he talks about how you would actually have to know what the cryptomat is called, but because we're inside of because in fact this is so not going to work, cryptomat, but because I'm inside of Houdini, the cryptomat you need, and the cryptomats I rendered are crypto materials. So if I view it here, I've rendered crypto materials, this one, and I've rendered crypto primitives, and these are what we visualize, but the actual Houdini cryptomat node needs this material 00 and crypto primitive 00, so I'll use the primitive one. And there is no way of like interacting with it like you can do with Nuke, where you've got that really nice ability to sample and pick what you need. And now I don't know if I could just grab those from Nuke, but not everybody's going to have Nuke open, and I don't know if I could just paste them in, if it would work. I don't know. Did it work? No. So I was like, kind of, how am I supposed to know? So if I press up, I wondered, I don't know. You would have to use the command on the EXR. So you'd have to basically go into Windows, Shell, I think it is, and then you would have to take the cryptomat path, middle click, copy that, and then did we load the shell up? Shell. Yes, then you have to type in this info -v, and then you paste the path, and you get this. Isn't that nice? Isn't that great? And you get all of this, and then you've got to like then find the manifest to get the cryptomat for the material or the primitive. So apparently somewhere in there is the the actual name of the object. So I think like, and this is really annoying, but you have to like copy that, and then apparently if I have got the crypto primitives and I place that one in, that is supposed to work. It doesn't. So I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. This was working the other day and it's just stopped working. So either I'm doing something really silly or... So I'm going to look back into that because I've actually had this working. Let's select all, but I could not get that to work. So, I mean, I'm hoping sidefx will fix this, but luckily I didn't need crypto mats. I was able to just grab this mat because of the silly ambient occlusion alpha thing. Sorry, I'm deviating a little. Let me just kind of come back out onto, back into the comp world. There we go. So the ambient occlusion pass was just a secondary thing. And then to render these are nulls, by the way. So normally you could say to the ROP output here, which needs a couple of outputs, it needs a path. So you can copy this and paste that into there and then click on this and go relative export. So this now is going to render this comp to disk with this path, and you can see I'm rendering this to my usual job, ren, asset, and now cops, and you're going to get the same thing as we did from Houdini's render, but it's not going to be Houdini, it's going to be cops. So I'll have an EXR version of that, and that's the way I'm working. I'm not converting this to an MPEG. I'm going to put those in DaVinci and do it later, I think, just see how it looks. And then I do the same with the occlusion, so it's exactly the same. So this would get rendered out. So I've got an occlusion comp and a grey comp. Well, the grey comp is actually, I might actually just take the contact sheet and place that in here and then use the relative reference. So now both of these are going to render the same thing. But what I would like when this renders to disk, maybe if I want to render this, and I've reformatted this to be within like a HD format, I might want to switch these. So if you remember when we rendered in Nuke, we were switching the background to a grey background as well. So I've set up a Python expression. So before I demonstrate this, I'm just going to select everything. I'm going to render the current frame. So in Houdini, if you select one node of the same type, anything you do is copied in. So that's quite handy. So I'm going to select one frame. So we're on monster A, pose 01, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to select the display flag here. And then I'm going to render this. And it's a grey comp. So it switches to grey. I'm going to render that. It switches to HDRI. And that switches to HDRI. And then we've got the occlusion, the separate render, just as a... We don't really need to render that because we've already got him here. So whatever. So this is just up to you how you want to work now. But how are these switching? Well, in Nuke we set up a Python expression, if you remember, which was why these green lines exist, to remind me. And we set up a Python expression to switch between this choose background, which, as we know, sits inside of these this Python node here, which was a bit manual, but it was something. But in Copernicus, you do it here, and I've set it to Python so you can do expressions and edit the string. So the Python expression exists in here, and the difference between them both is one is set to 0 and the other one is set to 1, and it just basically goes and talks to that switch node up here. So it'll just switch this over to 0 and 1 when it renders. So on disk, what you end up with is a under the project, so monsters, ren, asset, cops, because we're now, I know Houdini is cops, but I'm treating it as a separate thing because Copernicus, and I'm just doing it like that. So now we have this pose guy. So we've got 3 images, we've got the grey contact sheet, and then we've got the HDRI, and then we've got an occlusion if you really wanted to look at an occlusion pass. And there's a lot of flexibility in this. So normally this would run at the back end of your renders, your main renders, and you get like comps and you can do what you like with them. So you get a sequence. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's pretty much a quick, I'm not familiar with Copernicus. I've been using it for like a couple of days now. But I thought maybe we could quickly knock something up to replicate what we do in Nuke. So if, for example, I didn't really want to open up Nuke, or I didn't have a Nuke license anymore for some reason, I could at least just get on, get a Copernicus network going. So yes, so if we were now to render something to disk, we could trigger the whole thing. So let's try that. I'm just going to quickly jump to my Solaris desktop. I've got a custom one called Assets just for now. So I'm going to go and just do one frame, and I'm going to come down here to this guy, dirty all, and cook the static work items. So there's going to be a lot that renders, but it won't take very long because it's going to be one frame, and I'm just setting this to a very low resolution just so I can kind of see how this is going to work. So we're going to get, like, you know, the geometry variant A. In fact, we should be able to see A in the light rig, and then this other light rig, then the posed one, and then the light rig, and then monster B, and another light rig, and then so on and so forth, like that. So what that's going to do is when we run this, it's going to run that comp, but if I, whoops, because this is going to auto comp now any existing renders on the fly. So it's just going to read that EXR up of the task that I'd currently selected, which might be a little bit slow. And you see the bottom left, it's making its way through the bash comp. Unfortunately, I did come back out before that resolved. So what you'll see in the viewport, because we're in a different desktop, we can hide this and you'll see the comp has been auto done in Solaris. In this is the comp here. So if I was just to view space 3, you know, you can kind of see the comp there. So space 1 and then press U to go back up. So when I render everything, it's going to respect everything I've set up here, and it's going to run the grey comp, the HDRI, and the OCC. So if I click on that, that's referencing these guys. So it's going through those. So I'll click back again. So in theory now, what should happen, if I flush everything out just for a demonstration, if I go to my job, monsters, and then renders, and then assets, and then we've got cops. So I'm going to do a folder called old just for this demonstration. Old, I'm going to grab both of those, chuck them in there, and then same for Houdini. We've got a lot of stuff we've been mucking around with over the last few tutorials. I'm going to say old. This is just for the demonstration, the tutorial. So we've got nothing in place here, right? So what's going to happen is we're going to get file save, and we're going to get one frame rendered for everything to a certain resolution, but it's going to comp at HD because we've chosen that. So I'll just let this quickly save. Whoops. And then if I right click now and I, well, we should be able to just cook the output node. So in theory, what's going to happen, if everything works without even loading up any Nuke now, it's going to go through and it's going to look and render all these geometry variants, including our new addition, which is the temporary posed thing. We've got end-play monitor on, so it's going to return to the screen, and it's going to render the first one, very small resolution, and they're always going to be at the same frame. It's going to render this out. It's going to say, give me monster A. Oh, hold on a sec. Are we rendering some frame ranges here? We don't want to do that. Did I forget to? Oh, wait. So if I accidentally made a mistake and didn't check this, I'm just going to cancel that cook. Right, and then down here, I'm just going to say, just give me the current frame. Okay, I'm going to dirty all, generate static work items. It's going to ask me probably to save, and then I'm going to just repeat. I'm going to say cook the output node. So I'm going to have this output node, and then what you're going to get is, you can see straight away in the Houdini render asset Houdini, you see the first folder was created like so. So that was from the previous render that I cancelled. So this is this guy. So I know that this is going to be given his own folder. So It's not going to take too long because it's on a very low render settings and everything, but it's going to render everything that we need to start playing around with our comp. Again, I've accidentally left things I don't need in there, so I'll remove those when I ship this file. But you'll see that it's rendering the monster A and the material variant and the studio lighting. So that's kind of nice. And then when it's done with that, it'll switch over to another variant as well. And then if we quickly jump, we can create another tab and just quickly go back to the project, assets, sorry, renders, assets, and then in Copernicus is going to be taking those renders and doing the same thing as well. So it's going to be rendering those. So we should have, we should basically have one EXR. Not that many, but we should just have one EXR because that was a mistake of what we had before. We should have this guy. And then from that one render, we should have the equivalent comp. So there you go. So it's got the gray comp. And we get the HDRI comp as well. So they're a bit mushy because the renders are small and they're just scaled up and placed in there. But I thought that's quite an interesting thing that's took quite a bit of time to kind of figure out. But it's now a template, you know, or a digital asset. You can just drop this in as a starting point. So you can now spend your time like inside of these nodes, you know, getting creative with the materials and painter and stuff, and then you can do a nice presentation. There are other ways of doing this really with Python, very strict Python and pipeline systems, but not everybody's going to be at that skill level. And this is just showing what you can do with vanilla Houdini. You know, you just bring Houdini in and just muck around with it, and you can kind of create your own little structures that all save into a nice little network. So if you're looking at the Copernicus folder here, you can see that it's comping on the fly, so it's going to go through and render everything. So it's going through and completing these tasks. So hopefully that might be useful. So I think it's still finishing one down here. Let's go up. Yeah, so you're getting the, and they should all match. So monster A pose, garden, overcast. Yeah, so it's something, isn't it? It's something. So there's the occlusion pass as well. That's just joined the party. So as it's going through, it's kind of generating these. So these are the same monster, but we're in different light rigs. So it's up to you want to see. So monster B should make an appearance soon as well. So we should see monster B will be in the EXR render folder from Houdini first. So there he is, monster B. That's almost finished rendering. It's gone to a folder, version, beauty, and then he's going to jump over. It's going to get comped. And then I would imagine the folder for monster B will appear as well. So you can choose between pure EXRs or a comp EXR, or whatever you want to do. It's completely up to you. So there is monster B. So that should be comped. It's just doing the grey comp now. Is it finished? Yep. There it is. And then it'll do the HDRI comp. By the way, those contact sheets and the way I've done it is just how I'm choosing to see things. They could change. There might be one where it's 4. There might be a grey background, an ambient occlusion, HDR, and a wireframe maybe. I don't know. Depends what I'd need to see. But yeah, so I just thought I'd move through and show you that. So the rest is, this could be kind of, depending on like your machine and how many machines you've got, you might want to put this in a render farm. I don't need to, I'll just run it overnight for me personal work and things like that. And I don't usually render at this resolution. I'd render at 720. And that'll be enough, because there's enough, like DaVinci Resolve has got a great way of upscaling renders and stuff and things like that, just for internal reviews and things. So that lighting's kind of more intense, and that's another material variant where I've made him quite weird looking purple. Yeah, so this is just one frame. So these would, if you remember, these would spin around. So the only thing I haven't got going in the Copernicus network, which I've just forgotten about, is the spinning thing. So I would have to put an expression in here to spin. So I could just copy the transform from the light rig and pull that in, but I'm not going to do that just now. Maybe an exercise for you guys to do, or if you've got any extra requests or any advice, just put in the comments. This is just me learning a bit of Copernicus. Now, Copernicus is one of those things that you can use it for all sorts of crazy, surreal things. You can take data in weird ways and use it. You can take things from simulation data and use it to drive distortions. You can treat it as a normal compositor, which is like what we've done here, or you can treat it as a substance designer type thing where you can try playing a texture, procedural texture patterns and author normal maps and occlusion maps. It's amazing. So I'm going to be going through and trying to learn a little bit about that, because we dipped into Substance Painter to do some baking and things, but sometimes I think if you've got to do procedural things and they're not photorealistic, maybe Copernicus is a good solution. In fact, even if they are photorealistic, if you're good enough, I think you could make it work. I don't really care much about the designs and the textures on these, as we demonstrated in the first few episodes of these tutorials. It was just a placeholder to put something together, and then we can kind of choose a monster that we like and maybe go and retopo that and spend a bit more time with Houdini's retopo tools, or just get whoever's modeling it to do a better job. So that's kind of like a quick one of the Copernicus. So I think this is almost finished. So while we've been chatting away, it's gone through and rendered every single geometry variant in every single light rig, and then it's gone and produced a comp for every single one as well, which is now saved on disk in a nice little folder in my project structure. So in cops under the monster, into the assets. So yeah, you can see it's all labeled, so you can kind of see where it's come from. So we know this is a composite now as well. So again, it's up to you how you want to work. It's up to you how you want to do things. But it's a nice little way of presenting things, I guess. So thanks for your time, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. If you're finding this tutorial useful, why not drop a like and let me know in the comments. And if you're interested in learning more Houdini, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next tutorial.